also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, you're watching and listening to Andrew Pierce here on GB News with you until 2 p.m. Here's what's coming up. It's time to believe in Britain and take advantage of Brexit. Well, that's what Chancellor Jeremy Hunt would have you believe as he set out his vision for the economy today. But do his plans stack up? This May, for the first time, voters in every election in England will have to show a photo ID before they can vote. So why has this upset so many people on the left? The ongoing row over the gender bill in Scotland, the woman convicted of raping 2 women when she was a man, has now finally been moved out of the women's prison in Scotland. And Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish First Minister, can't say whether he's a man or a woman. Record numbers of electric vehicles produced last year, but there's not enough charging points. Joining me in the next hour to talk about all this, historian and writer Dr. Tessa Dunlop. You can be guaranteed we're not going to agree very much. And you at home, of course, are such an important part of this show, so don't forget to email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's what's coming up in this hour. But first, let's get the latest news.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor has confirmed HS2 will run to central London's Euston Station as planned. It follows reports the government was planning to scale back this leg of the project, instead terminating in a West London suburb. The rail link is costing over £44.6 billion, but supporting 22,000 jobs. Despite soaring inflation increasing costs, Jeremy Hunt says it is a priority.
I don't see any conceivable circumstance in which that would not end up at Euston. And indeed, I prioritised HS2 in the autumn statement. We have not got a good record in this country of delivering complex, expensive infrastructure quickly. But I'm incredibly proud that for the first time in this last decade under a Conservative government, we have shovels in the ground, we are building HS2, and we're going to make it happen.
Well, earlier the Chancellor set out his long-term plans for growing the economy, reiterating the government's pledge to halve inflation this year. Speaking at Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, Jeremy Hunt defended the decision not to cut taxes now. He added the best tax cut is a cut in inflation, currently close to a 40-year high. He also promised to use Brexit freedoms to boost growth in the UK. Speaking to GB News, the Shadow Public Health Minister, Andrew Gwynn, told us he wants action, not words.
If I had £1 for every time the government have said we need to cut red tape, we need to invest in regions, we need to level up, we need to grow the economy, we need more growth, we need better productivity, I'd be able to pay the tax bill of Nadeem Zahawi. You know, I don't want words, I want action. And quite frankly, I've been sick and tired of hearing the same messages over 13 years.
A student nurse has appeared in court accused of planning a terrorist attack at an RAF base after he was allegedly found with a pressure cooker bomb outside a hospital in Leeds. Our Home and Security editor Mark White was at Westminster Magistrates Court for us this morning, where 27-year-old Mohammed Farouk appeared via video link.
Well, some very alarming details emerging in this case here at Westminster Magistrates Court relating to the arrest of 27-year-old Mohammed Farouk. He was detained outside St James's Hospital in Leeds around 4:30 last Friday morning after a telephone call to the police from a worried member of the public. When police detained this man, they allegedly found a number of items, including a pressure cooker, which was, we're told, packed with 13 kilograms of explosives. They also recovered an imitation firearm. The military bomb disposal unit was called to the scene. They carried out an examination of the contents of that pressure cooker and deemed it as a viable device. Now, Mohammed Farouk appeared via video link from Bradford at this court wearing a prison-issue grey tracksuit. He spoke only to confirm his name, his date of birth and his home address. He faces 3 charges, a charge of preparing acts of terrorism. Now, the court said that that charge actually relates to reconnaissance that the suspect was allegedly carrying out late last year at an RAF base in North Yorkshire. The second charge relates to carrying explosives found outside St James's Hospital, and the third charge, of course, relating to that imitation firearm that was recovered. Mohammed Farouk has now been remanded back into custody. He'll appear in court again, this time the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, on the 3rd of February.
Mark White there, our Home and Security editor. An NHS hospital trust has been fined £800,000 after admitting failings in the care of a baby who died 23 minutes after she was born. Nottingham University Hospitals Trust pleaded guilty over the care of Winter Sophia Andrews, who died in 2019 at the Queen's Medical Centre. The total fine of £1.2 million was reduced due to the Trust's guilty plea. It's since accepted wrongdoing and apologised to the family. US President Joe Biden has called for any protests in Memphis to remain peaceful. It comes ahead of the planned release of videos showing the arrests that led to the death of Tyre Nichols. Body cam footage of the traffic stop on January the 7th is expected to be released later. Prosecutors say he died from injuries sustained in the violent encounter. 5 former Memphis police officers have been charged with the murder of the 29-year-old. And the London Fire Brigade are investigating the cause of a fire that destroyed a Grade 2 listed church last night. 80 firefighters were sent to tackle the blaze at St Mark's Church in northwest London just after 11 p.m. The building's been described by the National Churches Trust as an architectural treasure. No one was injured in the fire. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's over to Andrew.
Well, the Chancellor, the submarine, as I'd like to call him, Jeremy Hunt, he finally surfaced and he's made a major speech today. He's talking about long-term prosperity based on British genius and hard work. He spoke in central London. He defended not cutting taxes, insisting the best tax cut right now is a cut in inflation, which, of course, is at a 40-year high. And get this, he's going to use Brexit freedoms to boost growth in the UK. Here's a little, only a little, of what he had to say.
And my party understands better than others the importance of low taxes in creating incentives and fostering the animal spirits that spur economic growth. But another Conservative insight is that risk-taking by individuals and businesses can only happen when governments provide economic and financial stability. So the best tax cut right now is a cut in inflation. And the plan I set out in the autumn statement tackles that root cause of instability in the British economy. The Prime Minister talked about halving inflation as one of his 5 key priorities, and doing so is the only sustainable way to restore industrial harmony.
Underwhelming, isn't he? Particularly the way he delivers it. Our political reporter Olivia Utley's in Westminster. Olivia, this has been a long time coming, this speech. Can I say I rather feel I've heard a lot of this before?
Yes, it has been a long time coming. We've been waiting for some sort of a plan for growth from the Prime Minister and Chancellor ever since Rishi Sunak came to office. Now Jeremy Hunt has laid out his plan. It's essentially about, well, he'd call it unleashing British genius. It's basically improving Britain's productivity. That includes encouraging the over 50s to come back to work, setting up some of these regional hubs, mini Canary Wharfs, he calls them, to allow underperforming but areas but with high potential to flourish and thrive. But the sticking point is, of course, taxes. And Jeremy Hunt has been under a lot of pressure recently from his Conservative backbenchers to enact some of those plans that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng put forward to lower growth, to do it at a more stable rate that won't scare the markets, but enact them nonetheless. And today he held firm on his line that, yes, although he has an ambition for a low-tax economy, we can't afford to do it yet. And as he said, the best tax cut is a cut to inflation. Now, will that go down well with his party? It's not entirely clear. Of course, this plan to turn Britain into the next Silicon Valley is great and encouraging, and it's good to hear these optimistic words from the Prime Minister, but from the Chancellor. But we are going through this cost of living crisis, and there'll be plenty of people back home who think that the best way to level up their lives and to help them be empowered to invest in their own families, etc., is to lower their taxes. And instead, what the Chancellor is trailing for his budget is stealth taxes, essentially.
All right, that's our political reporter, Olivia Utley in Westminster. Delighted to say Ben Habib is with me, businessman, former Brexit Party MEP. So, trust the Tories on the economy, inflation at a 40-year high, taxes at a 70-year high. We saw this week car production at a 66-year low, and he's talking about releasing British genius. Why doesn't he start cutting our taxes?
And debt at a record high as well.
£2.5 trillion.
Yeah. I mean, what we heard this morning was typical Tory talk.
Yeah.
All aspiration.
It sounded very Tory to me.
No, it didn't. It didn't. But typical of this Tory party.
Right.
All aspiration. All, if you believe hard enough, we'll get there. But let's just unpick what he said. Inflation. Inflation raised its ugly head when taxes were already high, when government debt was already high, when the regulatory framework which currently existed. So his idea that keeping taxes high somehow is going to cut inflation is completely wrong. The only reason inflation is going to reduce this year, and it will reduce irrespective of what government does, is because it's already tracked out. We've had 12 months of inflation. Yeah. We're rebasing it off a higher level. So inflation, most economists are forecasting inflation down to 3 or 4% by the end of the year. What he fails to grasp, and what singularly seems to be failed to be grasped by any Tory MP, is that government only has 3 levers as far as the economy is concerned: taxation, spending, and the regulatory framework. And let's just look at each of those. Spending. Well, we can't spend more because we've already got record levels of borrowing, and taxation can't go up much higher. So spending is not a mechanism the government can use in a big way to get the economy going. Taxation, well, they've said they're not cutting it. And the regulatory framework hasn't changed, notwithstanding Rishi Sunak's promise that as Prime Minister, within the first 100 days, he would reverse out from our statute books all those EU laws, 4,000 of them, which are now on a back burner. So we haven't deregulated, we haven't charted a path through the United Kingdom that is independent, nimble, and puts the national interest first. We're not going to cut taxes, and we can't spend any more. So what we've got, I'm afraid, Andrew, is continuity catastrophe.
And before I bring Tessa in, who's chuckling here, because I think, yeah, of course, Tessa Dunlop here, historian and broadcaster.
Well, you must agree, whichever side of the political spectrum you're on.
Just before I get Tessa in, I want to say also, and we shouldn't forget he's talking about creating this fantastic new Silicon Valley, Singapore in Europe. How's he going to do that when he's just about to put corporation tax up by 6%?
That's the point.
When in his Tory leadership campaign last summer, by which I have to remind people he came last, he said he would cut corporation tax by 7%.
But you're absolutely right. You don't hope Silicon Valley into existence. You create Silicon Valley by giving tax incentives and actually entering into government-private partnerships. Silicon Valley is built very firmly on the US government working in tandem with private enterprise to make things happen. Governments can't do stuff on their own. Governments have been proven repeatedly to be hopeless at starting enterprises and then managing them through to success. You need private involvement. And the only way you get private involvement, and you said it, Andrew, is you've got to have a tax framework that helps the private sector to make money. And we are overtaxed, and we're about to put taxes up.
Tessa Dunlop.
I'm just staggered by not just your indignation, but I think there's an element almost of surprise that this nirvana that Brexiteers like you predicted was going to happen when, lest we forget, Conservative MPs were always going to be at the helm of it. I mean, it was a guaranteed car crash from the very get-go. And do you know, when you drill into what he's saying, it's absolute bunkum on every level. Right, so we've ended freedom of movement. That means we rely on our own... Okay,
very good, at last.
Andrew and I differ on that.
We've still got record immigration.
Yes, quite.
But that's a separate issue, isn't it? Because what you had freedom of movement within Europe was actually generally a pretty skilled and fairly young workforce.
No, it wasn't.
And quite a lot of it was.
Just working coffee shops. We didn't need them.
Gosh, I beg to differ.
I mean,
that's
Andrew
so
is right.
offensive.
We have. If you don't mind me just developing the point, you know, we have solved all our industrial issues through unskilled, cheap labour. We haven't mechanised the UK. We haven't automated it. We haven't boosted productivity by upskilling.
And
We've done it by relying on cheap labour.
I agree. There I agree, by the way. It's incredibly patronising. And countries now like Romania, by the way, growing at 5.8%, unlike Britain. Actually, even if we hadn't stopped freedom of movement, we wouldn't be having the same numbers over here because our pound isn't what it once was. Our economy isn't what it once was. We are, but given that we now have to work with what we've got, and we seem incapable of those illegal immigrants that come in, we seem incapable of processing them. So even if they were very skilled, you know, they're not available. So therefore, we need to educate our own. This government is presiding over an unprecedented 9% drop in investment per head in school children. 2010 to 2020 has seen a 9% drop in what's invested in each of our children in the UK. So where is this kind of brave new world full of engineers and Silicon Valley equivalents going to come from? That's what I would like to know, Ben.
And the point you made, and it's an entirely valid point with which I 100% agree, is that we're running out of money. Yeah. There's a limit to how much the government can spend, and it's reached that limit. We've got public sector broken right across the board, not just teaching, judicial system, the NHS, our rail service, everything is broken. And that is with government spending and borrowing at the highest levels it's been since World War II.
Where does all the money go? It's not going on education.
You're not allowed government to spend money because they spend it badly.
And that's the point. That's Andrew, you don't need me here. You've got... Can I just make this one point?
10 seconds.
Why do people presume that by taxing you and spending your money on your behalf that they're going to get the decisions right? People know how they want to spend their money. Cut taxes and let people do it themselves.
Tessa Dunlop, you're here till 1, so you've got plenty of time to disagree with me. Ben Habib, come and join me another time. We're moving on because the Electoral Commission and councils across the country are urging people to make sure they're prepared for the local elections in May. Could be a big headache for the Tory party, of course. It's for the first time in Great Britain, voters in all elections in England and some in Scotland and Wales are going to have to show photo ID at their polling station to get their ballot. At last, I say. Our reporter Jack Carson's been looking into the change.
In this year's local elections, history will be made. It will be the first time that voters in Great Britain will have to show a photo ID in order to get their ballot. It's not new to the UK, with Northern Ireland having the rule in place since 2002, but for voters in Britain, the change came as part of the 2022 Elections Act. There was opposition that it might disenfranchise voters, but the passing of the bill into law in April of last year means the electorate is now being asked to make sure it's prepared for this summer. Craig Westwood from the Electoral Commission explains what will be new for voters when they head to the polls for the local elections.
After each set of elections, there are a lot of people that do feel concerned that you can go into a polling station and get a ballot paper without having to demonstrate and confirm who you are. So there won't be that much difference. So you will go in and you will find a desk of a presiding officer and their team in front of you. They will ask for your name and address, check it off on the electoral register, as is normally the practice. But then there'll be an additional step of them asking to see your photo ID. There are lots of different types of ID which are eligible. They'll check that ID, and then once it's confirmed, they'll give you your ballot paper.
Not everyone is pleased the introduction of voter ID is here. Dr. Jess Garland from the Electoral Reform Society still has concerns about its practicality.
The government's asking voters to bring photographic ID. It's a type of ID that we know from the government's own research that over 2 million, about 4% of people don't actually have. And we know that it's also not equally spread across society. So if you're unemployed, if you're older, if you have a disability, you're much less likely to have the sort of ID that the government's asking you to provide in order to vote. And so clearly that is taking a huge risk with the next election. What we don't want to see is people being turned away from the polling station just because they don't have the right papers.
The Electoral Commission report on electoral fraud in 2014 found no evidence of systematic polling station fraud, but warned that polling stations remain vulnerable because of the few checks in place to check identity. Obtaining the most common forms of photo ID, such as a passport or driving licence, involves a fee, but the Electoral Commission stress a free voter authority certificate will ensure no member of the electorate is left out.
It is right that if people don't have eligible ID, including the free ID that's available, they will not be able to vote on polling day. But there are some other groups, such as the over 85s, who have lower levels of ID ownership. For them and for all other people who don't have ID, as you say, the voter authority certificate is there, and that is a free backup so that anybody who doesn't have ID can still make sure they get to vote on polling day.
The full list of accepted forms of ID is available on the government website, so people can be sure they're not caught out at the polling station from this summer onwards. Jack Carson, GB News.
Well, I can predict with absolute certainty that my guest Tessa Dunlop would disagree with this.
The thing is, it's already...
I don't.
Of course you don't. Look at you craning in for a fisticuff. I think that it's already a bit of a faffle, isn't it, voting? You've got to get there, you've got to stand in a queue, you've got to have your card.
You can have a proxy.
Who gets round to doing a postal vote?
Lots of people do postal votes.
OK, well, it's searingly organised, do a postal vote. But for most of us who are sort of rushing from pillar to post, trying to pick up a child from school or, I don't know, get to the bus, factoring in voting, we know from the all-time record lows of turnout, especially in local elections, you want to reduce barriers, Andrew, not raise them up.
Well, here's the thing. 46 out of 47 European countries insist on voter ID, including in your beloved European Union, Tessa Dunlop, and in Northern Ireland, they've had voter ID for decades. There's no problem with it. Why are you creating them?
Is there a camera to which I can talk? It brings great joy and soaring sort of endorphins to my brain to hear Andrew cite a European example as a reason
your
why
European
Britain...
Union, which you adore, is across the European Union, they have voter ID, and you embrace everything that ridiculous organisation comes up with.
That's actually not true. I didn't embrace leaving the EU, but I thought it was very flawed, better reform from within. That's a debate for another day. I think it's really key and was interesting and cited in your package that the most vulnerable and therefore the least probably likely to vote Tory, which wouldn't suit you, actually are less likely to have a driving licence and a passport, both of which require money.
OK, well, I, for one, am delighted the government has finally got in line with the rest of Europe, and I thought Tessa Dunlop, of all people, would agree with that. Now, coming up, the US and Germany finally joined the UK in agreeing to send tanks into Ukraine this week. We're going to be discussing whether that's enough. But before that, let's take a short break.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
So finally, Germany caught up with the UK, as did the US, and they're going to agree to send tanks into Ukraine. Germany will match the same number of Leopard 2 tanks, and the US have pledged 31 Abrams. Is this enough? Are they being sent quick enough? And how quickly will they get to the front? Joining me now to discuss this is the former leader of UKIP, who was, of course, a tank commander, Henry Bolton. Of course, Henry, you were head of the EU crisis response team back in 2014 after Putin started invading.
As he went in, really, to Crimea and Donbass, yes.
Yeah. Now, we're sending 14 tanks. It's not a lot, but it's symbolic. The US are sending... Well, 9 countries are going to send tanks in. How quickly can they get to the front line, and how important is it that they're actually then given air cover?
Well, the air cover isn't vital.
Right.
And actually, their performance is going to come down to how well they're supported and how they're used.
Right.
Because a tank unit doesn't operate in isolation. And what you're implying there, and correctly, is that a tank works with other branches of the armed forces to deliver effect. And of course, air cover is useful. Ideally, actually, because it's on a land battlefield, something like attack helicopters. There's been some talk of the Apache being delivered, but I think that's, a few steps down the road. But in themselves, 14 Challenger tanks from the UK could be, with trained crews, on the ground, I'd say, mid to late March. I think the Germans will be a little bit further behind. There are reasons for that. First of all, there's still this coalition to be put together, because if you're the Ukrainians, you might want lots of tanks from as many people as will give them to you, but they are all slightly different. And so you've got to ensure that there's some compatibility there in the logistics, because every single type of tank, if it's got a different engine or different ammunition, is going to require its own support. And it's rather like a fighter plane, in that you've got one pilot sitting in this sort of rather exciting piece of equipment, but behind that there is a massive tail of spare parts and engines, gearboxes in the case of tanks, different types of oils, different types of grease and fuel and ammunition, and a whole range of things that have to be in place before you can put them into the battlefield. It's a massive piece of effort. So that's got to be in place. And if you've got different types of tank out there, then that's going to be made more and more complex. And the more complexity there is on the battlefield, in that sense, the more vulnerable you are. And the Germans found this actually in Ukraine in World War II, when they went in and they found they couldn't support their armoured forces in the bad winter. So that's one of the constraints that the Germans are going to have, because there are many countries, as you rightly say, who are prepared to deliver the Leopard 2.
Yeah.
But it comes in a whole range of different varieties, and that's the problem. The Poles have one version, the Germans have another version, the Swedes and the Danes have yet another one, and the Canadians, again, another, because they've all developed them further.
Is it a game changer? We keep hearing that expression.
Yes, I believe so. And you said at the beginning, 14 Challenger tanks is symbolic. Yes, and politically, I think it did kick-start the broader coalition in this respect. Absolutely, and it was a tremendous thing for the UK to do. But 14 Challenger tanks, the Challenger is the big boy of tanks. The armaments are roughly similar. There's a difference in ammunition. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out on the battlefield. But Challenger is about 10 tons heavier than the Leopard. It's got better armour, and it's well proven on the battlefield. So, it is a major asset in itself. But if put the numbers together, it's even greater. But yes, it is. I would not want to be in a Russian tank facing one of these, whether it's a Leopard or a Challenger.
But we know from World War II, from Blitzkrieg, that your tanks are as good as your overhead cover. And now the Ukrainians are saying our next big hurdle will be fighter jets. The list is going to go on and on. This is one of the reasons for the German stalling, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And Germany's history with Russia, we've got to put this in context. It's not just, that they're concerned about their sort of being misconstrued after the World War II experience. It's also that we go back all the way to Gerhard Schroeder, as when he was Chancellor, and Deutsche Bundesbank's involvement in moving money for the Russian regime as Putin was coming to power, actually fundamentally enabling that to happen, which is one of the reasons I believe Gerhard Schroeder is in the position he is as chairman of Nord Stream, the gas pipeline. He's ex-German Chancellor, and he's one of Putin's best mates.
Appalling.
It is appalling. And Germany, I think, I know from when I was chief planner for Common Security and Defence Policy for Ukraine, Germany was blocking or vetoing any these not particularly effective anyway, but any potentially effective move by the European Union to deter further Russian...
Can we look at German fear, therefore? Because arguably, given the proximity of their relations, they know what Putin's capable of like no one else. And there is this idea that there's going to be mission creep, that the Russians are already sort of sabre-rattling, they're now at war with NATO and with the EU. What might that mean in terms of Europe's security?
Well, Europe's security has been directly threatened by this invasion anyway. Yeah. And there is no question. And people sort of forget that Putin has always, for decades now, been an imperialist Russian. Yeah. He has always been irredentist in his approach. He's always believed that these areas are intrinsically Russian, and Ukraine is more historically Russian in terms of people, because the tribe, the Rus, came from the area that's now Kiev, moved east hundreds of years ago, and Russia takes its name from them.
But this is one of the problems, isn't it? Where's the resolution?
We're running out of time here.
OK, very rapidly, the thing here is that Russia has challenged the West. This is an aggressive...
They've done the provoking, haven't they?
It's saying that Putin should be allowed, let's come to some arrangement, he can keep part of Ukraine, is like saying Hitler could keep the Sudetenland or Poland in World War II. If this isn't stopped now, I honestly believe that we will see, and I was also a NATO strategic intelligence officer, I believe that we will, if we don't stop this in Ukraine and confront him in Ukraine, and if he's not defeated and kicked out of the whole of Ukraine, we will have British and NATO troops fighting Russians directly in 10, 15 years.
Henry Bolton, thanks for joining us. We've run out of time, Tess. We've got to move on. Lots more to talk about, because coming up we're going to talk about that extraordinary case of the rapist who then identified as a woman, Isla Bryson. He's been moved to a male prison. Should he ever been admitted to female prison? No. And why can't Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, say whether he's a man or not? Plus, more royal scandals. Prince Andrew, he's back in the spotlight. But first, we're going to get a news update.
Good afternoon, it's 12:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor has confirmed HS2 will run to central London's Euston Station as planned. It follows reports the government was planning to scale back this leg of the project, instead terminating in a West London suburb. The rail link is costing over £44.6 billion. Despite increasing costs due to soaring inflation, Jeremy Hunt says it is a priority. Well, earlier, the Chancellor set out his long-term plans for growing the economy, reiterating the government's pledge to halve inflation this year. Jeremy Hunt defended the decision not to cut taxes now. He added the best tax cut is a cut in inflation, currently close to a 40-year high. He also promised to use Brexit freedoms to boost growth in the UK. An NHS hospital trust has been fined £800,000 after admitting failings in the care of a baby who died 23 minutes following birth. Nottingham University Hospitals Trust had their £1.2 million fine reduced after pleading guilty to providing unsafe care. Winter Sophia Andrews died in 2019 at the Queen's Medical Centre. Her mother, Sarah Andrews, says no financial penalty will ever bring.
We thank the judge and recognise the delicate balance she has made to impose this significant fine, which we hope sends a clear message to trusts managers that they must hold patient safety in the highest regard. Sadly, we are not the only family harmed by the trust's failings. We feel that this sentence isn't just for Winter, but it's for all the other babies that have gone before and after her.
A student nurse has appeared in court charged with planning a terror attack at an RAF base in North Yorkshire last year. 27-year-old Mohammed Farouk is also charged with possession of explosives after he was arrested outside a hospital in Leeds last Friday. A military bomb disposal team was called to the hospital and a maternity ward was evacuated as a precaution. He's due to appear at the Old Bailey next Friday. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Andrew will be back in just a moment.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay it down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, the repercussions from Nicola Sturgeon's gender reassignment bill continue. The rapist, Adam Graham, who raped 2 women and then identified as a woman, Isla Bryson, was admitted to women's prison. He's now inevitably been moved out. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, still won't say whether he is a he or a she. This will continue to put the spotlight on the SNP's transgender policies. And remember, in Westminster, Rishi Sunak's government says they are going to block this change in the Scottish law. Joining me now, I'm delighted to say, is the teacher and transgender journalist Debbie Hayton. Debbie, good afternoon to you. I don't think we've got Debbie Hayton. Let's talk to Tessa Dunlop. We have got Debbie. Hello, how nice to see you, Debbie. This couldn't have been worse timing for Nicola Sturgeon, but it brings into sharp focus all the problems and the objections people had about this legislation in the first place.
Well, it does, doesn't it? On one hand, Nicola Sturgeon says that trans women are women, that we can choose our sex, we can become women just because we say we are. But on the other hand, she now has a case where somebody who calls themselves a woman can't be put in a women's prison. The whole situation does not make sense because the Scottish Government has tried to build policy on fantasy, and that's not the way to make good law.
Interestingly, Debbie, the Conservatives in Scotland put down an amendment to this bill to say that prisoners should be excluded. So this would have meant that Adam Graham, who now calls himself Isla Bryson, could never have gone in to a woman's prison. But the Labour Party and the Scottish National Party voted that down.
Well, they blocked it, yes. There was a lot of amendments put forward which would have improved this law, but they were blocked because it detracted from the philosophical position, the ideological position the government was putting forward that people can choose their sex. And that applies just as much to sex offenders as it does to anybody else.
But Debbie, I think we have to own here that Adam or Isla at the moment is incarcerated and being sentenced, etc., on the basis of pre-existing law in Scotland. And in fact, if you drill into the very small number of transgender individuals in jails in Scotland, it is adjudicated over on a case-by-case basis. For example, the 11 transgender women in jail at the moment, 6 are held in men's estate. Well, so we're not saying that just because you're a transgender woman, you end up in a female prison. Each case is judged on its individual merits. Well,
Debbie, you replied to that.
We can judge cases on the merits, but I hear a lot about these individual risk assessments, but if the risk assessment puts a rapist in a man's prison, the risk assessments do not work.
Absolutely right. That's the whole point. Isn't that the whole point, Tessa? You say it's done on an individual basis. How did they put a man who's raped 2 women, who then identifies as a woman, in a women's-only jail?
To be clear, in England and Wales, where policy is a bit different, you can still, as a transgender woman, end up in a women's prison, although 90% are in men's prisons. So this isn't just...
No, let's go back to that specific case. The rapist, the male rapist, who then identified as one, went into a women's-only jail. You can't possibly think that's a good way forward.
I think that is incredibly short-sighted, but we should point out that when she was in that female prison, Corton Vale, the only female prison in Scotland, she was segregated. She was entirely alone. She had no contact with other female prisoners.
How do you think other women felt in that prison? Debbie, let's go back to you. The law in Scotland is changing, although Rishi Sunak says he's going to stop it, to enable 16-year-olds to change, to self-identify as a different gender. If you'd been able to do that at 16, would you have?
I might have done, and it might have been a big mistake. I was not old enough at that time to appreciate what it meant to be male, what it meant to be female. Arguably, I perhaps made a mistake later on in life. We're told, and children are told, that there is this thing called gender identity, which determines whether they're a boy or a girl, and they can grow up to be a man or a woman. They can't. None of us can. None of us can choose our sex. And to be giving that choice to children so young, and the dark side of that choice is if you choose wrongly, your life may be messed up. You may be messed up for life. I don't think it's fair to put children in that situation. I think children need to grow up first, find themselves, find what it means to be human, and grow to adulthood and understand what it means to be an adult even before they can go through any of this legal process.
Before we bring Tessa back on that, when you say adulthood, Debbie, how old would you say is the right age?
I'm a teacher. I would say that the human brain reaches full cognitive maturity around age 25. We know that young men, especially in their early 20s, do silly things. But the age of majority throughout the UK is 18. So I would put it at 18, but with grave reservations that it is so young, and feeling that perhaps there's some things that we shouldn't be allowing 18-year-olds to do.
This is where I'm afraid we totally misunderstand that Scotland is its own legal jurisdiction. I know I grew up in Scotland. I'm all for bashing the Nats, you know, I took it to them a couple of days ago, but we have to own that in Scotland you can get married without consent age 16. In Scotland, you can vote for your government age 16. So are we saying, I can decide I want to marry you, Andrew, but oh, I don't know what my sex is.
Please
I've
don't.
got to wait for 2
Please don't.
years.
But the point, Tessa, is listen to Debbie. She's been there. She's done it. She's saying 16, it's too young to make this enormous change. Changing your gender.
But then you have to overhaul the whole of Scotland. Heaven forbid that is the UK going to start meddling with the rest of UK law and say, actually, you need to get married with
Hang on,
consent.
we've had devolution in Scotland since 1998.
Yeah.
This is the first time it's happened. Debbie, what do you say to Tessa?
Well, in terms of Scottish law, this is the first time in 25 years that it's happened. And the Scottish Government was warned that their bill was inconsistent with the Equality Act. They were warned repeatedly. MBM policy warned them. For Women Scotland warned them. I was consulted and I warned them, but they didn't listen. And the fact is that the GRR bill in Scotland interacts with the Equality Act because it determines who's male, who's female, how single-sex exceptions can be applied. They were warned about this, but they didn't listen, and the end result is that the bill has been blocked. But Alistair Jack has said that let's talk about this. Let's come up with a bill that is consistent with the Equality Act that you can then pass. That's what good government is all about.
All right, that's Debbie Hayton. Alistair Jack, of course, being the Scotland Secretary. We'll carry on that conversation another time, but I want to talk to you now about electric cars. Have you got an electric car? You might have to get one by 2030 because the government want to phase out all new petrol and gas cars by 2030. Good luck with that, because where are you going to charge your car? Because it's not very easy. Ministers have set ambitious targets for 300,000 chargers by 2030, but there's apparently only about 9,000 were installed last year. They're asleep at the wheel, aren't they? And, of course, it costs so much to charge them and it takes so long. Joining me now is a great friend of the show, great mate of mine. He's a broadcaster and he's a car dealer, Danny Kelly. Danny, what do you make about this? We just simply don't have enough places to charge cars. And I think currently we've got 37,000. We need 300,000 in 4 or 5 years' time, which means a 288% increase. It's not going to happen, is it?
No, it's not going to happen, and they are asleep at the steering wheel, Andrew. They need to build 3,000 charging points per month if they're going to hit this target of petrol and diesel-free new cars by 2030. Do you know what? When Boris Johnson, Andrew, I don't know whether he announced this as some sort of bonus of Brexit, but the rest of the European Union have announced that the ban on petrol and diesel cars is 2035. I don't know if he was triumphant when he announced that we're going to bring it forward 5 years. It's unless something dramatic happens, then we are going to miss that target. In fact, one of the great stories over the festive period for petrol lovers like me and 95% of the audience listening was when all of these smug Tesla drivers were queuing up at a service station in Cumbria, some of whom were waiting for about 7 or 8 hours. It was a Daily Mail story. And the reason being is that there were so many million cars on the road, and now a proportion of them are electric, and people wanted to get home back to London and to Cornwall. And you had people on the other side of the forecourt spending 5 minutes putting petrol in. Honestly, Andrew, I wish that we could follow the European Union, because it ain't going to happen.
Danny, I mean, I think, you know, I don't have a car. I've not owned a car for over 30-odd years, not because I'm a green eco fanatic. It's just because what's the point of having a car in London? The roads are clogged. But it can take, on average, 8 hours to charge a car, I'm told.
Yeah, this is the crazy thing about it. I mean, if you've got a supercharger, a Tesla supercharger, it can take 40, 45 minutes. And that's why there was a queue of about 7 or 8 hours, because there were about 20 Teslas trying to charge. If you have a driveway, if you're fortunate enough to have a driveway, and good luck with finding one of them in the capital, Andrew. If you're fortunate enough to have a driveway, then you can charge it overnight on a trickle charge. But it takes a long time. A supercharger, it takes, around about an hour. But if you've got a trickle charger at home, it takes a long time. And there was also a story where it's actually cheaper to drive a petrol Vauxhall Corsa per mile than an electric Vauxhall Corsa. It's crazy.
It's all bad. Danny, let me ask you, how much does it cost to buy a new electric car on average? I'm told a king's ransom.
Well, that's a great question, because overnight, when Tesla reduced the price of brand new models overnight by £5,000 or £6,000, the prices have plummeted. A typical cheap run around town, a Renault Zoe, which is an electric car with about 100-mile range, I think they're about £30,000. But if you want to travel anywhere to see people, as families and friends do, you've got to be spending 40, 50, 60 grand. And by the way, you can't give them away at the auctions. Car dealers aren't touching used electric cars because the message is out there, Andrew. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
All right, Danny, that's Danny Kelly. Let's bring Tessa Dunn over there. Now, you're a great green advocate. Do you drive an electric car?
I actually have a hybrid
car? Oh, do you?
Which means
Why am I not surprised?
It's a fail-safe, because if there's nowhere to charge it, you can always rely on old-fashioned petrol. But actually, I thought there's a couple of points.
How often do you use petrol?
Well, actually, you can use petrol all the time, but what happens is...
Doesn't that defeat the object?
No, because what happens is then when you're driving, things you do like braking, which would normally guzzle petrol in a normal car, charge the battery.
But you're still using petrol.
And if I go very slowly, a green light comes on telling me I'm using electric. So my problem is that I clog up the traffic even more because I go really slow so that I don't bite into my petrol.
You're one of those nightmare drivers.
Yeah, I'm a nightmare driver. But just very quickly, back to the levelling up thing of the government. You know, it's all going to be, you know, fair shares around Britain. 1/3 of the charge points are in London. And you try going to the north of England, I think it's like one on the motorway to Northumberland or something ridiculous.
But also, what if you live in the country, Tessa? Where are you going to charge your car?
Well,
what if you're a farmer? What if you live in a small village?
Well, if you've
no hope.
If my mum lives in a remote village in Scotland, and there the very rich landowner has installed the charge point, but heaven forfend if you go to charge your car and she's already parked a large 4x4 at it and is charging away. No, there's problems here, but I don't think we should be so defeatist. I thought your guest was a little smug.
No, I thought Danny got it right, because the thing is, it's metropolitan MPs in London and the cities think this is all plausible and ways, but that's what the charges are. And if you are living in the country, remote parts of Scotland, you're not going to be able to get around.
And just to let you know, at the moment we're installing 23 charge points a day. If you want to hit the target for 2030, it's got to be 100 a day.
Yeah. What you could do, of course, you could just cycle, walk, or use the tube, like me.
I was on my bike this morning, Andrew.
All right. Now, coming up, we're told the King has told Prince Andrew to stay away from Buckingham Palace. And Prince Andrew, of course, is also considering a legal case to clear his name. That's after Virginia Giuffre, who he settled with, was it £12 million to settle with a woman he claims he's never met, has pulled out of a legal fight with another person she claims abused her, Alan Dershowitz, a lawyer. So could this overshadow the coronation, the idea that Prince Andrew goes back into battle with this woman? I'm joined now by the former royal correspondent, Michael Cole. Michael, I read in whichever paper broke this story this week that the King was relaxed about the idea of Prince Andrew returning to this horrific court case. We saw Ghislaine Maxwell talking about this from her prison cell only this week. I don't believe it. I think the King would want this like a hole in the head.
You and me both. I don't believe it either. There are some Andrews who have common sense and good judgment, and there are some Andrews who don't. And I'm afraid Prince Andrew falls into the latter category. He must be delusional if he thinks he can overturn a legal arrangement entered into freely less than a year ago in a Manhattan courtroom. He would have to demonstrate, prove fraud or duress or coercion or some sort of malicious misrepresentation to a rather savvy Manhattan judge to get this overturned. So it ain't going to happen. In the words of Muhammad Ali, he's got two chances, slim and none. And I would bet on the second. I do understand why he's going down this route. And I will speculate if you'll permit me.
Yes, please.
Yes. Well, this lady who was 17-year-old Virginia Roberts, now Mrs. Giuffre, living in Western Australia, she was rather acting like one of those girls in the Crucible, and she was accusing people, and she accused Alan Dershowitz. Now, Alan Dershowitz is a very celebrated celebrity lawyer. He defended Klaus von Bülow, and he defended O.J. Simpson, and he's a professor of law at Harvard University. And she said that she'd been abused by him, and then she remembered, oh no, that she hadn't. He, of course, denied it forcefully from the beginning. And she also said at one stage that she'd been abused by Prince Andrew, not only in London, New York, and on this island in the Caribbean, but also at Jeffrey Epstein's ranch in southwest at New York. And then she remembered, no, it wasn't at the ranch. So I imagine his lawyers, who haven't served him terribly well, nor have his PR people throughout this whole saga, are thinking that they may have some angle there to overturn this. As you say, it was a huge settlement, maybe 12 million, maybe 10 million, but certainly a lot of money.
Michael, if he was to return to it, would he have to go into the witness box, and how well would that go?
Yes, well, of course he would. We must remember, and I think it's fair to say, that this was a civil case. Civil cases are settled by the exchange of money. And criminal cases, if there's a conviction, that's jail time. Now, Prince Andrew has never admitted anything. He's never been charged with anything. For goodness sake, he's never been convicted of anything. And he says and maintains that he never, ever met Virginia Roberts. How do you explain that photograph? Well, Ghislaine Maxwell was allegedly taken in her Muse house in Belgravia. She says it's a fake, or she thinks it's a fake. Well, there's a lot to be gone through, but if he's going to demonstrate that this should not have been entered into, it's a very, very long chance for him, and I wouldn't put any money on it.
All right, Tessa Dunlop, what do you think about
Well,
this?
it's also assuming, isn't it, Michael, that he's going to come out of a retrial on the very slim chance that it occurs, smelling of roses. Of course, 50% chance or more that it goes the other way for him. So I think he would be incredibly stupid to take it up again. Presumably, he wants to clear his name and reassert himself as HRH. But he's forgotten that he's already been judged by the court of public opinion. I think whatever's said, all we can remember is, look, mate, you hung out with a convicted paedophile for 4 days in New York on a jolly.
Yeah, well, that goes back to what I said about Andrews with no judgment and common sense. Of course, there never was a trial. The idea of reaching this agreement last year was to clear it away before the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, so that it wouldn't be talked about at that time. Of course, it's increasing it. And of course, this is the last thing the Buckingham Palace and the new king wants, this sort of thing hanging over them. We're not very far away from May the 6th, and they wanted to get this out of the way. It's not very convenient, and I can understand why the king is saying to his younger brother, you don't need your flat here anymore at Buckingham Palace. You're not carrying out royal duties. Perhaps the next thing will be, do you really need Royal Lodge Windsor, a beautiful house in the middle of Windsor Great Park, where Queen Mother lived, and indeed where she lived when she was queen, before she was queen, with King George VI. So not a good time for Prince Andrew, but you can only say, judge a person by their friends.
Indeed. Michael, thank you for that. That's Michael Cole. Tessa Dunlop, we'll find a word to you. He is the most unpopular member of the royal family by a long chalk. I think you're right, isn't it? It's all over for him. The public have made their mind up.
But what's extraordinary and what's this indicative of is the inbuilt entitlement. He still can't get over that he's not where he was born. He's fallen down the hill and he can't believe he can't get back up. And don't forget, I think the real motivation for this is he's inherited a bit of private money from Mummy, darling.
Maybe he has, but we don't know because the monarch's will is never, ever, ever published. Tessa Dunlop, it's been a joy to have you here. Are you going to come and join me again?
I very much hope so, Andrew.
Good. Now, I'm Andrew Pearce here on GB News. Plenty more still to come in the next hour of the programme, so don't go anywhere. But before that, let's get the weather. It's still cold.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Most places are going to be dry today. A fair bit of cloud around, but some sunny spells coming through. Most of us will have a dry weekend as well, thanks to this area of high pressure anchored out to the west. It is in control of our weather, but at times weather fronts will drift in from the northwest. This one approaching the Western Isles will bring a little bit of rain here late in the day. We do have the odd light shower elsewhere, but they're fading out and most places will be dry. As I said, quite cloudy, but we've got some breaks in the cloud. North Wales, northern England, and down the eastern side we'll see a bit more sunny spells developing through the afternoon. Temperatures are around about average for the time of year, 7 or 8 degrees Celsius. We will see this zone of rain working into the Western Isles and then across the Highlands through this evening. That will continue to track slowly southwards. Most places, though, having a dry evening. Notice the blue hue on the map here. A frost will form across parts of South Wales and southern England. Depends on the cloud and the fog, however, because there will also be a few thick fog patches, but easily some towns and cities dipping below freezing. Could be well below in some rural spots. Not as cold further north because we'll have more cloud, although still some frost likely as the cloud breaks late in the night in northern Scotland. A cloudy, dry day for many then on Saturday. Again, some sunny spells. A little bit of light rain over northern England at times. We may see a bit more rain for north coast of Wales and northwest England during the afternoon. The odd shower in the far north. Temperatures perhaps a touch lower than today's. 6s and 7s generally speaking. That thicker cloud and zone of light rain will continue to affect parts of northern England, North Wales for a time on Saturday evening. The odd shower in the far north of Scotland, but again, most places dry as we head into Sunday, and many will stay dry on Sunday as well. There will be some rain in the far northwest later, and it will get very windy on Sunday across northern Scotland. For most of us, turning just a touch milder. Goodbye.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, you're listening and watching to Andrew Pearce here on GB News with you until 2 p.m. Coming up, we're talking about migration. New official figures record a jump by 7.5 million migrants living in the UK since 2011. More than 1 in 7. We'll be breaking down those numbers. Will they, won't they? HS2 high-speed railway. Well, more controversy over that, but the Chancellor says he's committed it to running it through central London. We're going to be talking to a Stop HS2 campaigner, and it's Holocaust Memorial Day. It's 78 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz camp. We're going to be talking all about that, all of that and much more. And joining me in the next hour will be the lyricist and author Sir Tim Rice. And you at home, of course, you're such an important part of this show. Don't forget to email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's what's coming up next. But first, the latest news.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 1. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor has confirmed HS2 will run to central London's Euston Station as planned. It follows reports the government was planning to scale back this leg of the project, instead terminating in a West London suburb. The rail link is costing over £44.6 billion, but supporting 22,000 jobs. Despite increasing costs due to soaring inflation, Jeremy Hunt says it is a priority.
And I don't see any conceivable circumstance in which that would not end up at Euston. And indeed, I prioritised HS2 in the autumn statement. We have not got a good record in this country of delivering complex, expensive infrastructure quickly. But I'm incredibly proud that for the first time in this last decade under a Conservative government, we have shovels in the ground, we are building HS2, and we're going to make it happen.
Well, earlier the Chancellor set out his long-term plans for growing the economy, reiterating the government's pledge to halve inflation this year. Jeremy Hunt defended the decision not to cut taxes now, adding the best tax cut is a cut in inflation, which is currently close to a 40-year high. He also promised to use Brexit freedoms to boost growth in the UK. Speaking to GB News, the Shadow Public Health Minister Andrew Gwynne told us he wants action, not words.
If I had £1 for every time the government have said we need to cut red tape, we need to invest in regions, we need to level up, we need to grow the economy, we need more growth, we need better productivity, I'd be able to pay the tax bill of Nadeem Zahawi. You know, I don't want words, I want action. And quite frankly, I've been sick and tired of hearing the same messages over 13 years.
An NHS hospital trust has been fined £800,000 after admitting failings in the care of a baby who died 23 minutes after birth. Nottingham University Hospitals Trust had their £1.2 million fine reduced after pleading guilty to providing unsafe care. It's the highest fine ever issued for failings in maternity care. Winter Sophia Andrews died in 2019 at the Queen's Medical Centre. Her mother, Sarah Andrews, says no financial penalty will ever bring Winter back.
We thank the judge and recognise the delicate balance she has made to impose this significant fine, which we hope sends a clear message to trusts managers that they must hold patient safety in the highest regard. Sadly, we are not the only family harmed by the trust's failings. We feel that this sentence isn't just for Winter, but it's for all the other babies that have gone before and after her.
A student nurse has appeared in court charged with planning a terror attack at an RAF base in North Yorkshire last year. 27-year-old Mohammed Farouk is also charged with possession of explosives after he was arrested outside a hospital in Leeds last Friday. A military bomb disposal team was called to the hospital and a maternity ward was evacuated as a precaution. He's due to appear at the Old Bailey next Friday. Elsewhere, US President Joe Biden has called for any protests in Memphis to remain peaceful. It comes ahead of the planned release of video showing the arrest that led to the death of Tyre Nichols. Body cam footage of the traffic stop on January the 7th is expected to be released later. Prosecutors say he died from injuries sustained in what they've called a violent encounter. 5 former Memphis police officers have been charged with the murder of the 29-year-old. The London Fire Brigade are investigating the cause of a fire that destroyed a Grade 2 listed church last night. 80 firefighters were sent to tackle the blaze at St Mark's Church in northwest London just after 11 p.m. The building has been described by the National Churches Trust as an architectural treasure. No one was injured in the fire. And a mathematician who was born in Russia and has spoken out against Moscow's war in Ukraine was the UK's biggest taxpayer last year, paying more than £487 million. The Sunday Times tax list reveals 100 of the UK's wealthiest people or families contributed to nearly £5.2 billion in tax last year. Denise, John and Peter Coates, the people behind Bet365, paid more than £460 million. Gymshark's chief executive Ben Francis is the youngest person on the list, paying £11.6 million. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's over to you, Andrew.
Well, welcome to the show. And we're going to kick off our second hour by talking about migration. Figures from the Office for National Statistics, which has been number crunching the results of its 2021 census, show some rather surprising reading. When the census was done 2 years ago, 10 million people in England and Wales were born outside the UK. More than 1 in 7 people, a jump of 2.5 million in a decade. The proportion of people in England and Wales born outside the UK has increased across all regions, 4% nearly in London and the East. The most common long-term arrivals to arrive in England and Wales, India, Romania and China. But all of non-UK born people, for those from the newer EU countries which joined since 2004, are most likely to be employment. What do we make of these figures? Joining me now on the show is Stephen Wolfe. He's Director of the Centre of Migration and Economic Prosperity. Stephen, this is another sign, isn't it? The government says they're going to get to grips with migration, immigration. Apparently we have to call it migration. I'm old-fashioned. It used to be called immigration. They've lost control completely, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely, because these numbers now prove very clearly what many people have been saying for years, that the combination of legal migration, those coming here to work and study, leads to a lot more of those people remaining here, added to asylum and illegal immigration, is changing the demographics substantially in the UK. And you can see that by those figures. The increase of 2.5 million people in 10 years is quite staggering. And there doesn't seem to be any real interest in the government or the opposition into managing this effectively.
And one of the issues, of course, Stephen, with this, what is put in place to accommodate these people in terms of more schools, more hospitals, more houses?
Well, there is the point. That is very clearly the biggest issue about that, because statistics show that we actually produce about 165,000 new homes a year. So over that period of time, we have built 1.65 million new homes. And yet house prices are still rising. We're seeing the demographics change so that you've got 2.5 million more people. So that's an excess of people over homes. So we're not building enough and house prices won't fall as a consequence. We can see the increase in demand in hospitals, local schools, and our GPs. So infrastructure is straining because of the increase in population too. And you never seem to see anybody in government correlating the two. No one ever seems to say the demands on our NHS are caused by increasing population, of which a large proportion of that is the increase in immigration.
What should happen? Should there be strict limits on the numbers of people coming in? We often hear we're talking about an Australian points-based system, and we're not even discussing here, Stephen, the chaos that takes place across the English Channel virtually every week. I think it was 450 people GB News detected crossing in one day last weekend.
Well, absolutely, there should be very deep concern about the numbers of people coming in across the channel. You saw that even the Home Office estimated that there could be 80,000 coming this year, which is of deep concern because of the cost of those. Government should be more grown up. Of course, they said after Brexit that they'd introduced a points-based system. They introduced the Migrant Advisory Committee, which was supposed to manage those numbers and how people were brought in for visas and work. But that doesn't seem to be working effectively at the moment, because on one side of government, particularly those who are supported by the Treasury, they want to see more and more people coming in for work and more people coming in as students. And on the other side of the coin are those in the Home Office who are wanting to try and control the process. It seems disjointed, dysfunctional, and not grown up in the way of thinking of how we manage immigration and population together.
And we know we've got tens of thousands of people, if we think about the Channel, Stephen, who are in hotels. I don't think any of them should be in hotels. I think there should be camps or holiday camps, that sort of thing. They're not doing any work, and yet we read all the time there's nobody to pick fruit, nobody to pick potatoes out of the land. Isn't there a way in which we can utilise those people, perhaps pay them some money too? They are, after all, getting board and lodge.
Well, they are getting board and lodge. And again, this comes down to the argument that's currently going on between both sides of the immigration industry. On the one hand, there are those who are saying we should have safe routes, and when they get here, we should immediately allow them to work, and then they go off and will pick fruit in the farms. There is absolutely no proof anywhere that once you give someone asylum and the right to remain, that they will end up going to pick fruit in in fields or actually do the jobs that are missing. What happens is something totally different to that. And these statistics that we have seen from the ONS today actually show that for a large number of those from the EU2, which is Romania and Bulgaria, they're involved in the motor industry, repairs, garages, and cleaning of cars and that type of work. Those from the E8 work in kind of retail and pubs and that sort of industry. But there is 50% unemployment of those who are African and 55% unemployment of those who have come from Asia and the Middle East. So there is no proof that these people go and do these jobs once they arrive here.
All right, that's Stephen Wolfe, who's the Director of the Centre of Migration and Economic Prosperity. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, after his speech today, says there's no conceivable circumstances in which HS2 would not stop at Euston Station. The Sun reported today that actually the whole Euston Terminus project could be abandoned to save money because the project is spiralling out of control in terms of costs, and it could end up, people could end up in a suburb of West London. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, said HS2 potentially not being routed to Euston is an example of the Tories failing to deliver on big infrastructure projects. Joining me from Euston Station is our GB News reporter, Paul Hawkins. Paul.
Yeah, hi Andrew. We're actually technically at the back of Euston Station. Behind me, that is the enormous footprint for HS2, or at least where they're hoping to build the part of Euston Station with 10 platforms, where a HS2 train in the future will dock. Maybe it'll dock. We don't know. As you said, Jeremy Hunt earlier said it will terminate in Houston. Just to give you an overview of HS2, of course, it's all about essentially connecting the Midlands, the North and London with faster trains. Now, they've already ditched the leg to Leeds, from Manchester to Birmingham, and then from Birmingham onwards to London. They're hoping the Birmingham to London leg will be completed by 2033. Now, the Sun reporting this morning that because of inflation, of course, they're going to need more money to make the costs work, to make the sums add up, and that because of that, maybe they'll end up terminating the route at Old Oak Common. That's a new station that's being built out towards the west of London, about 5 miles west of here, and they'll instead not run the trains all the way to Euston, which would be huge because the amount of disruption that has been caused to this area is enormous. We've been speaking to the people just to my left here, and they've talked about the amount of noise that you get, the disruption it's caused, that people have had to move away, etc. Behind me there used to be a hotel that was knocked down. So if the train wasn't to run all the way here, if HS2 wasn't to arrive in Euston, it would be a really big deal and would be really bad politically for the government's levelling up agenda. However, Jeremy Hunt has said today that it will run to Euston. This is what he had to say earlier.
Don't see any conceivable circumstance in which that would not end up at Euston. And indeed, I prioritised HS2 in the autumn statement. We have not got a good record in this country of delivering complex, expensive infrastructure quickly. But I'm incredibly proud that for the first time in this last decade under a Conservative government, we have shovels in the ground, we are building HS2, and we're going to make it happen.
So for now, the Chancellor appears to be saying that HS2 will go ahead as planned, that it will terminate here at London Euston, but Labour are seeking more clarity from the government.
Don't think it's a sensible idea for the government to continue to promise things and then not deliver them, especially long-term infrastructure projects. We know if you listen to business, if you listen to the experts, that actually long-term infrastructure planning will boost our growth, and yet we've seen with the Conservatives 13 years of failure. Growth has stagnated in the UK. We're lagging behind other European countries. We have to invest in our infrastructure for the long term.
Yeah, and infrastructure is a big plank of getting that growth in the economy that Angela Rayner was talking about, and it's why the government are keen to stress that HS2 will go ahead as planned. We're hoping for more clarity from the Department for Transport and also the Prime Minister, but for now, Jeremy Hunt saying that HS2 will terminate here at Euston.
All right, that's Paul Hawkins for us there. Joined in the studio by Lord Berkeley, who is Deputy Chairman of a government review into HS2, and you are one of those, Lord Berkeley, who said the whole thing should be scrapped. I was looking at the figures. When Gordon Brown's government conceived this project in 2009, estimated cost 20 billion. We're now looking way over 100 billion. We're just not very good at these things, are we?
Well, we're looking at 160 billion, which is probably 8 times the original cost that Gordon Brown came out with.
Yeah.
The bigger problem for Euston is that there is no design that the government and HS2 have produced which can be safely built. It's fine saying it's going to go to Euston, but you've got to build tunnels, you've got to build fly-unders, and there's no design. They've been trying to do this for 10 years. I tried to help them initially, but I didn't want to know. And it's fine saying you've got to have a city centre station in Euston, but if it doesn't work, then what are you going to do? Their option, we see in the Sun, is to terminate at this place called Old Oak Common, which is a few miles west of Paddington.
Yeah.
But there's no way you can design that for a station to take 18 trains an hour, terminating and going away again. So we've got at the moment a great scar across the country going from Birmingham to, through the Chilterns towards London, and they're going to build tracks on it and try and run trains. But if there's no station anywhere in London that'll work, it's a hell of a waste of, 160 billion pounds.
We've despoiled the countryside. Lots of people have had property blight because they've had their homes compulsorily repossessed. If the government can't build in Euston, is it still financially viable, Lord Berkeley, to pull the plug right now and say, we've lost X, but if it's going to save us going up to 160 billion, which could go higher, shouldn't they do that now?
I think they should do it now. If they cancelled it, their total spend would probably be under 10 billion as opposed to 160 billion. And some of that money should be put towards improving the railway lines in the north and the Midlands going east-west, which are awful compared with the lines around London. And they could repurpose, as I call it, the bit that they've started on, maybe as a small commuter line, and you could, which would help a little bit, but not going 160 miles an hour to get you to Birmingham half an hour quicker.
I was just saying, isn't the whole point of this as well a bit out of date? We discovered during pandemic, Lord Berkeley, that people could work quite well from home. Now, I prefer to work in an office. My office is the Daily Mail if I'm here. But a lot of people do work from home. Do we need all this money invested to get to Birmingham a bit quicker, to get to the north a bit quicker?
The difference is we need better rail services for daily commuting.
Sure.
In the regions, getting to your job, getting a better job, going shopping, going whatever you like.
Across the Pennines.
Across the Pennines, exactly, east-west, and across from from Birmingham to Derby and Nottingham. What we don't need is to get to London quicker for the occasional visit. And us parliamentarians, we love high-speed lines getting to our constituency. Not that I have one, but you see what I mean?
Yeah.
That's once a week. And as you say, we've got our laptops, we can play with them. We don't need to get there half an hour quicker. What the commuters need is a reliable service that's safe, that's hopefully electrified, and they can look at more job opportunities, more school opportunities in the regions.
Just finally, Lord Berkeley, why is it, I read, that the projected completion date of HS2 is between 2028 and 2033? How can there be such a big gap of 5 years? Why don't they have a specific date? And then I read in the Sun today, more like 2038.
Well, I think it's more like 2045, actually.
We probably won't be around.
I certainly won't be around. But don't forget that the government has to put an optimistic spin on all this.
Yeah.
But if they haven't designed Euston yet, they haven't got a station in Manchester that works, in spite of the efforts of Andy Burnham and all the other councils up there.
Yeah.
And by the time you've come up with something that everybody agrees, and you get some planning permission and you've got tenders for everything, it will take that length of time. But if they don't know what they want to build, it's very difficult to see, what they can do.
Well, that's Lord Berkeley. You've heard his prediction. He thinks the cost will end up at 160 billion. Eye-watering. It could be even more. Now, coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about Holocaust Memorial Day and how much anti-Semitism is still a live issue in modern Britain. Before that, though, we're going to take a look at the very cold weather.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, before we move on, let's return to the issue of High Speed 2. I've been a sceptic about it for years, I have to say, because joining me in the studio for the rest of the hour is the former Labour MP, Dennis McShane. Now, Dennis, this was a great project of Gordon Brown's. I think Andrew Adonis, a great mate of yours, was the Labour Transport Secretary. £20 billion was the original estimated cost. You saw Lord Berkeley, who's one of yours, he's on your side of the House of Lords, civil engineer saying, actually, it'll be £160 billion. Is it worth it?
The iron rule of all these big infrastructure projects is the prices double, treble. I mean, we're the worst country in the world in managing it.
Why is it Britain? It was 3 or 4 years late. It cost miles more than it should have
idea.
done.
I mean, the idea is, if you're going to have HS2, I mean, either it should have been strangled at birth, as it were. Lord Berkeley sat on Boris Johnson's committee on it, and I don't know if they recommended to kill it, but of course...
he said it should go immediately.
But of course, our Prime Minister always had other things on his mind, then Prime Minister, and didn't take any big decisions.
But it's been beset with financial difficulties, Dennis, every year since it started.
Well, I mean, look at the development of all our military projects. I mean, why have the Germans been able to sell, for example, 1,900 of their Leopard 2 tanks around the world, and we've only been able to sell 38 of our Challenger tanks? We are not a good country at making what the modern world wants or selling it. But to go on to Old Oak Common, I laugh
that's
when
what the Sun was saying. That's where people will get off in London at Old Oak Common. Where is it?
I loved it, Andrew, when you were discussing that with Lord Berkeley, because that was where I spent too much of my boyhood as a train spotter.
You weren't a train spotter.
It was one of the best...
Did you wear an anorak?
Train spotting, guys, probably pre-anoraks, but train spotting slots in London had big sheds. You could go in there, and the railway workers were so friendly. I mean, it'll all be health and safety now. And I could, slice off, underline off of my Ian Allen railway spotting book, lots and lots of trains. Look, it's a dump. If you wanted to invent the word middle of nowhere, it would be spelled Old Oak Common. And the idea you're going to bring down all these dynamic businessmen and Andy Burnham and the North and dump them somewhere in the middle of, I couldn't even tell you where it is now.
Well, that's a problem.
It'll take just as long to get to Euston from Old Oak Common.
I can remember when they were building the station for 2012, and people were the London Olympics, and a lot of people thought they were getting off a train in Stratford-upon-Avon, and they'd be able to go and see the Bard and the home of Anne Hathaway and Shakespeare and the wonderful Swan Theatre, and then they discovered, actually, no, it's Stratford East in the London Borough of... They weren't quite so keen. It's not going to be the best introduction to Britain getting off the HS2
it's
what's
crazy.
It called, Common?
Old Oak
Which
Common.
you say is a dump.
Well, that's probably very unfair.
We're probably going to get protests from people who live there now, Dennis.
But if you actually let's take two other tiny examples. We can't spend too much time on this.
Yeah.
But, I mean, when Mrs Thatcher decided she'd go for the Channel Tunnel, that was it. The decision was taken and things happened. And we built a dedicated railway station at Waterloo, or extended it for the Channel Tunnel trains. We built tunnels through Kent, tunnel under the Channel. It's a huge project, and there was no messing. And then we transferred...
But she was a Prime Minister who got things done.
Well, it also... But look, here's another example. We're very pleased with this Elizabeth line.
Yeah.
OK. In France, Paris, the first Elizabeth line was opened in 1997. They got 5 of them. Now, perhaps we should get a few French engineers in and take over our railways.
That's Dennis McShane. He's with me until 2. Now, today is Holocaust Memorial Day. Events are being held across the country, including landmarks like the London Eye, which will be lit up in purple from 4 p.m. A 92-year-old Holocaust survivor said they believe anti-Semitism is still on the rise because young people don't learn about the Holocaust anymore. Joining me now on the show is Jake Wallace-Simons, who's the editor at the Jewish Chronicle. Jake, today is the 78th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. That was the biggest of all the concentration camps. I think nearly 1 million people died there. Can you tell us why, in your view, it's still so important that we mark this day?
Goodness, well, that's a big question. I think first and foremost, it's vital because this was a genocide perpetrated by what appeared to be the most advanced Western European civilization of the time, using all of the scientific, technological and logistical means at its disposal. And that really matters because for us here in our society, we feel that we are modern and enlightened and beyond all that. But it just reminds us how close that atavistic side of human nature can be to the surface, even when we reflect upon ourselves as being civilized and sophisticated. But also, of course, it's vital because the lessons from the Holocaust are very difficult to instill and to live with. By definition, it was an incomprehensible atrocity. I mean, 6 million men, women and children going into factories of death in this day and age, pretty much, is difficult to get your head around. And as a result, it becomes trivialized and watered down into grainy footage that's overly familiar and something that becomes part of the wallpaper and that everyone agrees is bad, but doesn't really cause us to question our consciences and our place in the world and our place in society. And of course, our responsibility to ensure that it never happens again, which in itself has almost become a cliche. I think for all the... Sorry.
I was going to say, do you think enough is taught about the Holocaust in schools and also more broadly about anti-Semitism?
I think that the interesting thing about anti-Semitism is that it has the ability to mutate and to evade detection. So when it's been found out, it tends to change its clothing. So the Holocaust happened, people agreed that racism was wrong and killing people on the basis of their race was wrong. But then anti-Semitism seemed to have moved and become a political version of itself, which is targeted towards Israel rather than Jews as a race. And I do feel that the level of vitriol and hatred towards Israel has become excessive, but it can be disguised. it poses as a reasonable political position against oppression and so on and so forth. And that really is something that's of grave concern. And that when people teach the Holocaust in schools, as is right and necessary, sometimes that can not really feel relevant to what's going on today, because anti-Semitism in a way can hide in plain sight under the cover of Israel.
All right, that's Jake Wallace-Simons, who's the editor at the Jewish Chronicle. Dennis McShane's still with me. Dennis, briefly, I mean, I've talked to some people, they don't know, young people, they don't know what the expression anti-Semitism means, which is shocking.
It is indeed shocking. I wrote a book in 2008 called Globalising Hatred, the New Anti-Semitism, and it's exactly as we've just heard. There are plenty of legitimate criticisms of the state of Israel, of any state that does bad things, but the idea that Jews can't exist in peace and security is core anti-Semitism. Now, what I would like to see taught, Andrew, is in the 1930s, the News Chronicle, wasn't the Daily Mail then, filled its pages saying there are too many Jews being let into Britain, our professions are being overcrowded. And we turned a blind eye to that and to the rise of nationalist ideological hate in Germany. Germany had a lot of support in the 1930s. So did Franco, so did Mussolini. And we appeased these fascists and didn't tackle them at root. And you can see around the world that nationalist hate bubbles up in different ways in different countries, and we're nervous to talk about it.
All right, that's Dennis McShane. He's with me until 2 o'clock. Coming up after your news update, we're talking about the 2 British voluntary aid workers who were killed in Ukraine. I'm going to be talking to someone who met one of them there.
Good afternoon, it's 1:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Chancellor has set out his long-term plans for growing the economy, reiterating the government's pledge to halve inflation this year. Speaking at Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, Jeremy Hunt defended the decision not to cut taxes now. He added the best tax cut is a cut in inflation, currently close to a 40-year high. He also promised to use Brexit freedoms to boost growth in the UK. Meanwhile, Mr Hunt also confirmed HS2 will run to central London's Euston Station as planned. It follows reports the government was planning to scale back this leg of the project, instead terminating in a West London suburb. The rail link is costing over £44.6 billion. Despite increasing costs due to soaring inflation, Jeremy Hunt says it is a priority. An NHS hospital trust has been fined £800,000 after admitting failings in the care of a baby who died 23 minutes after birth. Nottingham University Hospitals Trust had their £1.2 million fine reduced after pleading guilty to providing unsafe care. Winter Sophia Andrews died in 2019 at the Queen's Medical Centre. It's the highest fine ever issued for failings in maternity care. And a student nurse has appeared in court charged with planning a terror attack at an RAF base in North Yorkshire last year. 27-year-old Mohammed Farouk is also charged with possession of explosives after he was arrested outside a hospital in Leeds last Friday. A military bomb disposal team was called to the hospital and a maternity ward was evacuated as a precaution. He's due to appear at the Old Bailey next Friday. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Andrew will be back shortly.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Now, sadly, it emerged earlier this week 2 British aid workers who've been reported missing in Ukraine have in fact been killed. 28-year-old Chris Parry and Andrew Bagshaw, who was 47, have been trying to rescue people from the embattled town of Soledar when their car was hit by an artillery shell. Joining me now on the show is Sebastian Pulaski, who's a photographer and filmmaker, and he worked with Andrew in Donbass while shooting a documentary on evacuations. Good afternoon to you. Very sad, Sebastian. They knew, presumably, they'd been there for a long time, the risks they were taking.
Yeah, first of all, the entire community of volunteers are deeply sad and regretful. It is with a heavy heart that I am telling about the death of my friends. We are deepest sympathy of the family, and we are all with them right now. There is for first, what I can tell a little bit more about Andrew than Chris, because I was work with Andrew. I met a Chris, but I never speak with him. I was speak only with Andrew, and I believe the thanks to these people like Andrew and Chris, the statistics of the inhabitants who suffered from the war, in the war, are much lowest. They really did the job what is really needed there and have a real impact. I have seen thousands of people pull it out from the basement over the malls. They've been living without the light, without any electricity, without any connection with the relatives. So I believe this work have what did Chris and Andrew have a sense, Do
you think they recognised how much danger they were in?
Yeah, I am sure, For first, I am sure about that for 100%, because they have been working with a group of volunteers who have been volunteering since 2014 and then start again from 24th February. So very experienced people, some of the locals people, but many international as well. A lot of Russian people have, or a lot of people have also the medical background, medical training. I believe the Chris and Andrew have enough experience to doing this. I have been in Soledar with the Andrew. Andrew was a driver because he didn't speak Russian, so main job was just be driver. So I have been with him. and on the mission, and he was all the time super focused. He came, he was telling me, he told me that he came here to the help. He first month when he came to Ukraine, he helped with the humanitarian aid, and then he discovered this evacuation process, how it's important. Because there is a problem, because there is there is of course government official evacuation of the people who are living in the front line, but where is constantly shelling, there is only this kind of individual volunteers or group of volunteers can help these people and pull out these people from the harm. So basically, we get some requests for the families. They said they fell to the west, but some grandmother, some dad, mom, they still live there because demographic of Donbass is very complicated, like social complicated. There is a mixed Russian-Ukraine people. There's people who haven't got in. They just would like to be there. They don't want to leave their home, and then
Sebastian, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. But Sebastian, we're going to have to break in there.
Yeah.
All right, Sebastian, thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt you. That's Sebastian Polarsky, who's a photographer and filmmaker. Dennis, looking at those images of those men, 28, 47, young men, really, and knowing the risks, heartbreaking, isn't it?
The very best of Britain. I mean, really, these are extraordinary heroes, victims of Putin. We ignored Putin for far too long. I was in Ukraine as a minister in 2005. Putin was crushing then the demand for freedom. Then he sent his army into Georgia in 2008. Again, I was down there in Crimea. And all the time we were creating Londongrad. We were creating a red carpet for the oligarchs, for the lawyers who protect them here, the financiers who protect them here. And now we're seeing the consequences of our appeasement of Putin.
And of course, he invaded Crimea in 2014.
Exactly, we did nothing.
Lifted a finger.
We did nothing. We said nothing, said the absolute minimum. And I just salute the courage of these two remarkable men, as I say, the best of Britain.
If they were your sons, would you be discouraging them to go and do something else? Or your daughters, what would you say to them?
No, you can never do that. I was involved in South Africa when it was a bit tricky. I was put in prison in Poland by the communists supporting Solidarność, but never actually facing military onslaught. And that is just something that shows their bravery, their decency, their courage. And in the Foreign Office, there's a plaque, there's a wall, all the diplomats who've been murdered, usually by terrorists, in the last 20 or 30 years. I hope somebody somewhere puts up a memorial to these two men.
That's a very good point, because there'll be others too, I'm afraid, Dennis, who will die too. Now, it's time to get some of your views on the stories of the week. So joining me on the show is some of our GB voices, Sean Fox and Miranda Richardson. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
Hi there. Sean, we're going to start with you. What's the stories that have caught your eye this week?
Well, the apparent humanitarian crisis we're having with the crossings of boats, children, people in need. Let's set aside that there are obviously people trying to get into the UK under false pretenses, but we do have mothers, fathers, and children who are obviously taking a gamble, a risk. I mean, who would leave and take a gamble of going onto a small boat, risking their life in the hands of people they don't even know and have to trust for safety? Who would take that risk unless they absolutely have to? So that's one of the things that's bothering me. Obviously, the whole Prince Harry and Meghan thing's an ongoing issue as well. I'm not sure how far the rabbit hole you want to go down.
Oh, God, let's not talk about Harry and Meghan, Sean. Talk about something else for me before I bring in Miranda.
Well, let's talk about the Conservatives and their lack of any common sense at all at the moment. Labour only looks attractive because of how poor Conservatives are doing.
That's right.
I thought we were swapping one bad lot for another. I mean, if they were really in the interest of the people, we'd keep the same party. We wouldn't change from Conservatives. We wouldn't change from Labour. Well, apparently we swap one, we complain, we bring another one in, we complain. It's just swapping crack rope for more crack rope, in my opinion.
All right, so that's Sean Fox. Miranda Richardson, good afternoon to you. Nice to talk to you again. What do you want to talk about?
Afternoon, Andrew.
And give us a...
Well, do you know what? I've just driven back. I've been to see a friend today who's in hospital having chemo. And part of my route has brought me back up through Oxfordshire into Northamptonshire. And HS2 came up again today, and how they're not gonna take it. And I've just driven past fields that are turned over all to HS2. Is it going to go into central London now? Is it not going to go into central London now? I was just saying, are we going to have any relief or break as to when this is going to happen? And should we go further? And shouldn't we go further? You've just ripped up half the countryside. At least have the decency to decide where you're going to park the thing when you get there. You know, come on.
What do you think, Miranda, about the... Did you hear Lord Berkeley, who's been a long-standing critic of this? He says, look, pull out the spades now because it's going to soar to £160 billion. And you know it'll probably cost even more than that. It's supposed to cost 20 billion.
I think that actually, if we'd worked on all our smaller areas, or some of our towns, I've got Corby, that's not that far from me in Northamptonshire, huge town, hasn't had a train station. Now, I know that sounds daft, but actually it's links to the rest of the country. It's quite central in the country. Why don't we start developing these smaller stations that we closed over the years? We want to make our network better and actually make it work, you know, by not having the... I caught some news about up north today about one of the cross-Pennine trans rail lines, whoever it was, who were costing a fortune and they're only operating at 40% of their lines. Why didn't we invest this £1 billion package that we've had in our network rather than one train line? You know, we could have been so much better connected if we'd spent the money that way.
Miranda, would you like to take the job as Transport Secretary, please? Because you make a lot more sense than the current one.
I'll give it a go. I'll try anything once.
Yeah, well, we couldn't do any. You couldn't do any worse. I can't even remember his name at the moment. It'll come back to me in a moment.
No, exactly. It'll be somebody else. Don't worry, because it'll be somebody else next week. It'll be fine.
All right, look, that's Sean Fox and Miranda Richardson, our GB voices. Lovely to hear from you both. Dennis McShane, what do you make about what Sean was saying? Well, not much difference between the Tories and Labour. The only reason your lot are 20 points ahead in the polls is not because of Keir Starmer's great crusading vision. It's because the Tories have made such a monumental mess of everything.
We had a report this morning that the spending from the Institute of Government on schools in Britain has gone down 9% since 2000. I can rattle off lots of other stats. I'm not going to. Basically, and it was the Lib Dems at the heart of this. Everybody talks about the Tories. It was Nick Clegg and I can name other names, David Law, Red David, who came in and said, forget society, let's give our friends a bit more money. And the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, with what was called austerity economics, basically it was one of the biggest transfers of public money into the hands of private individuals. I mean, you and I might have benefited from in rising house prices and so on, Andrew. And it was at that point, I mean, the NHS was OK-ish. There were 20,000 more police on the streets. Theresa May abolished them all.
Madness.
And we are where we are now. And it's going to take another 10, 15 years even begin to get back into real fighting fit shape for this country.
But what about the division from Labour? If you stopped someone in the street and said, tell me 5 great policies of the Labour leader, what would they be? What would yours be?
Well, Robin Cook famously...
No, we're not talking about Robin Cook, we're talking about Keir Starmer. Robin Cook's been dead for a long time.
No, very simply, Robin was told, let's have lots of new policies before 1997.
Okay.
And he said, probably to you, Andrew, but Andrew, we're 20% ahead of the polls. Don't mention new policies, they'll only frighten people. To be serious, there's nothing wrong with putting more police on the streets. There's nothing wrong with bringing back real apprenticeships, as the boss of Siemens said on the Today programme this morning.
I agree with that.
Abolished by the Tories. There's nothing wrong, and here's very tricky, we've lost about 300,000, 400,000 really good workers, particularly in the healthcare sector, but problem with Europe, Andrew.
All right, we're not going to go down Europe because I know you were desperate to talk about Brexit, but now I'm going to talk about music. I know you like musicals, Dennis McShane. So An Evening with Tim Rice, the legendary Tim Rice, the Duncan Wall Band and West End Singers, The Circle of Words, is taking place in several theatres across the country from February. It's a celebration filled with reminiscence, revelation, music, laughter, featuring some of the most popular songs of recent times. Who better to explain than the man himself? Tim, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Andrew. Great to see you.
Now, I know you're recovering from a big operation. You're recovering from a big op, I know, aren't you?
Yes, I've had a new hip. I'm soon be back to my panther-like status.
I
had to have a hip replacement. My family wanted to replace the rest of me and keep the hip. But basically, I'm nearly back to full fitness, and I'll be able to walk onto the stage. I think my first gig, I know my first gig is in Northampton on the 6th of Feb, and I'm fully confident that I'll be able to walk across the stage and say a few words.
Now, Tim, you've written some of the great musicals of our time. I'm thinking of Jesus Christ Superstar. You worked with Elton John, of course, on The Lion King. Is it possible to say which is your favourite?
Well, not really. I always feel that whichever one I haven't heard for the longest time is the one that I like best. It's difficult. There are ones I like for certain reasons, and there are certainly one or two that I don't like for certain reasons. I mean, there have been plenty of hiccups on the way. I'll always have a soft spot for Joseph, and I think Joseph is the one that will probably last the longest because it seems to generate enthusiasm in every new generation. It's not trying to be trendy. It's just a lot of cracking tunes with Andrew on top form, and it's a great Bible story, and it works with children of all ages. And I think that one is, in some ways, my favourite because it was the first thing I wrote with Andrew that ever had any traction at all. I think technically, Chess or Evita are probably my two favourite in terms of actually things that I've written that I think work. And I wouldn't have too many things I'd like to improve, but there are always things I hear in some of the shows. I go, oh, I got that line wrong, or that song should be slightly better placed. But there's no point in being one's own worst critic. I get enough stick from critics without having to add my own complaint to it.
Tim, tell me how the theatre is now. I'm thinking not just in the West End, but in the provinces post-COVID, because that was a terrible time with all the theatres dark.
Well, I think, it's interesting. I was looking at the Broadway figures last night, the Broadway figures for the previous week. And in a way, I think New York was much more neurotic about COVID than we were, in the sense that things took much longer to get back to normal. And Broadway is doing pretty well, but by and large, and the same is true for London, it's the shows that are already established that are doing well, which is great for the shows that are already established. But people don't really want to take a risk if they can only afford to go to one or two shows every year, especially if they're coming from out of town, rather than gamble on something they haven't seen. They'd rather go and see something they enjoyed first time around again. Just as if you go to a great rock concert, Elton John or something, you know you're going to get so many great songs that you've heard Elton do before, and that's why you're going. And I think to a certain extent the big shows have benefited from that. But there's a lot of great new stuff coming up, and quite new stuff like Six, which is a wonderful show. And I think people will always want live entertainment. It cannot be yet, well, I suppose it can be now, who knows, but I was going to say it cannot really be bootlegged or copied. The live experience is something that you can only get live by definition.
All right. Tim, thanks for joining me. That's Tim Rice. You can see him on stage. You can find him on his website. He's appearing in a lot of theatres talking about his amazing, extraordinary career. A lot of your views coming in. This says, your views on the story of the day. This is from Linda, who says, HS2 is about having an up-to-date rail system, not quicker times to get to London. It also brings a lot of employment. And other people saying, surely the answer to the small boats is to stop making the UK so attractive. You've been sending emails about the trans rapist. Annette says, surely under the proposed Gender Reassignment Act, this trans rapist would legally change details on his birth certificate. That way he'd be officially recognised as a woman and not a trans woman. We've got 30 seconds with you, Dennis McShane. What a mess Nicola Sturgeon's made of this trans bill. We've got 20 seconds.
Yes, because she's an identity politician. Healthcare, education, which was the pride of Scotland, is in a lamentable state, inward investment and the rest. But all she focuses on is breaking up the United Kingdom, just like other people here want to break up the United Kingdom and the European Union. Just have to get that in, Andrew. And she is the fault line of modern politics is identity politics. The trans rows are about identity. She's an identity politician. She's got it badly wrong.
That's Dennis Fisher. You've been watching me, Andrew Pearce. Thanks for joining me. Have a lovely weekend. Next up, it's the briefing with the fabulous Arlene Foster. But before that, we're going to go to the very cold weather.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. Most places are going to be dry today. A fair bit of cloud around, but some sunny spells coming through. Most of us will have a dry weekend as well, thanks to this area of high pressure anchored out to the west. It is in control of our weather, but at times weather fronts will drift in from the northwest. This one approaching the Western Isles will bring a little bit of rain here late in the day. We do have the odd light shower elsewhere, but they're fading out and most places will be dry. As I said, quite cloudy, but we've got some breaks in the cloud. North Wales, northern England, and down the eastern side we'll see a bit more sunny spells developing through the afternoon. Temperatures are around about average for the time of year, 7 or 8 degrees Celsius. We will see this zone of rain working into the Western Isles and then across the Highlands through this evening. That will continue to track slowly south.